Well, good morning. This morning we looked at Ezekiel 38 and 39 and God's final victory over the invaders from the lands of Gog and Magog. And of course, the question immediately becomes, where are these nations? When I was young growing up, we had scholars of a particular persuasion who were convinced that Gog and Magog were references to Russia, which of course the USSR in those days was a great world power and feared by many Christians. There's no evidence for that. In previous centuries, it's been the Huns, and you look back over the centuries, every great nation to the north of Israel, it's been called Gog and Magog because of the reference in Revelation to these nations as well. It could even have been Rome. Rome is of course north of Israel, and so it could have been applying to that. But it seems to me that this is speaking about a final battle. The nations of this world colluding together to attack God's people. And at this, when it looks like God's people are going to be crushed and stamped out of history, then the Lord intervenes and wins his victory over the nations of this world. And right through Scripture, we see this great prophecy that God eventually is going to make himself known to the world by a final triumph in a great battle. In this book, in Daniel, in the book of Revelation, of course, we see these great prophecies that God is going to finally defeat all the forces of this world. The kings of this world will be shattered and smashed before him, and his empire will rule forever. So I don't think there's any great benefit in thinking where the lands of Gog and Magog may be. There's not even great benefit in thinking whether the modern state of Israel is the land that's being prophesied here and whether it's about an invasion of the modern state of Israel. I think we just have to wait and see what God will do. Whether this is metaphorical, which for most of church history was believed to be, the people of Israel were regarded as being a picture of the church, and the church's persecution would be overturned by the Lord. It was only in the 20th century, with the establishment of the State of Israel, that it began to be thought of that this was a literal invasion of that land. We'll wait and see. But here is the great promise we have. The end of history is God's triumph over his world. History ends with God conquering the proud empires of this world and showing himself, and showing that throughout history he has been at work to come to this point where all people will bow before him and acknowledge his lordship over his world. Great nations now, great kings now, mighty empires that have been built, prepare to bow the knee before the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings.